Hey, everybody, welcome back to our second podcast episode for today. As you can see, I have a special guest with me. I practically co host to some degree. I mean, you host your own podcast. So, in our network, I might add. So, and you've been on this show a couple of times.
Yeah, I think like Guardian twice and the regular podcast twice. So,
Yeah.
and then you've been on the Off Duty On Duty podcast twice. So,
Yeah.
uh, which goes out on you guys' network. So it's like a big happy family.
Incestuous. Anyway, I'm glad to have you in the co host chair there, I guess.
Well, thank you. Glad to be back.
Howdy, Hopper. Good to have you joining us. I don't think I've seen your name pop up for a couple episodes at least. So we'll begin the official part of the show here momentarily. Give you all a chance to pop in there. A couple of you on YouTube and a bunch of you on Facebook. That's good to see. Been a minute. Dive since I could catch a live. Yep. Oh boy! Now all of a sudden I'm yawning. You put me to sleep already, Brian.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I'm having to get readjusted to the fact that my kids are back in school, and it's remarkable to me that my two oldest kids, one's in middle school, and the other one's in high school, and like they start school at 7 a.m. Well, I mean, to some people that might not be a big deal, and to some people that's probably normal. I am not the world's biggest morning person. Okay, I'm not a morning person really at all. And so what that means is getting up at like 5, because you got all this stuff, you got to get ready, you got to get the kids ready, you got to get them out the door. So, and I'm perfectly happy in a world where I wake up at 6:30. I'm perfectly happy with that world all day long, all year long. But that doesn't work when kids got to be at the school at 7. So I'm working on getting readjusted and getting to bed earlier.
Yeah, I'm not fond of mornings unless it's something that I really want to do. Like if you tell me it's regular day-to-day job, I'm like, oh, drag out at 6:15. But if you tell me, hey, you got to be an hour away to go take a class or to go teach a class, I'm up at like 4:30 in the morning, coffee. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
you
get
have
it.
Hopper saying he's up at 4 on work days.
I'm sorry.
So in a past life, I worked in the construction field, and I had job sites I had to be on site by 6 or 6:30 in the morning, and I got up at 4:30, whatever. Man, I tolerated that life is what I did. I tolerated that anyway. And then the other thing too is like I went to school, right? I never went to school before 8 o'clock. Like elementary school, middle school, junior high, high school. I never went to school before 8. So then we end up in Colorado, and my kids in elementary school, they go to school at 8. But here they go to high school and middle school and junior high at 7 a.m. It's like,
yeah,
whoa.
That's the way it is here.
Man.
Because it's like they got one set of buses for all the elementaries, junior highs, and everything. And junior high was the worst. It started at 7:15. That's AM for those curious. It's not the second one. But that I dreaded that era. But the grade school, it's like 9 to 3 or something like that. So, which is inconvenient as a parent, I can tell you 100%, because what job starts at 9 a.m. But I was kind of that 80s latchkey kid though. So it was like, mom would turn the light on and go, all right, it's time to get ready. And you'd go get ready. And it'd be like, you better start walking because you're not going to make it. Don't let me find out you're tardy. So, my cardio was pretty good going into the 6th grade because, it was 3/4, maybe a mile to my school. And it was all built in the era that my where I grew up, the neighborhood sprung up around the school. So, it wasn't on a major highway or whatever. So, I could hoof it. And then if I was really in a rush, I could cut through the creek, hopefully it wasn't raining, and I could get there pretty quick.
Yeah.
So
cool.
And then coming home, it was like the parents get home at 5. You should be there by at least 4:45. So, and nobody ever got hurt too bad. So I wouldn't dream of doing that today, but.
Well, guys, we'll go ahead and get the official podcast portion of this done. That means from this particular point, this is the audio that will be published to the podcast feed. And if this is your first time catching us live on YouTube or Facebook, just know that this is a podcast first and a video show second. So the podcast gets published every week. New episodes typically release on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We record them on the Wednesday prior. And just search Concealed Carry Podcast. You'll find us on any number of podcast playing apps and websites and such. So let's do this thing. You ready?
Yep.
All right. In 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 3, Episode 12. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman, and I'm still getting used to the new script. I forgot to mention, it is the Concealed Carry Podcast brought to you by Access Sites. See, we added that little ditty like a month or two, or maybe it's been 3 ago now. Anyway, title sponsor Access Sites. Today is Wednesday, August 18th, 2021, and I am your host, Riley Bowman, joined today by special guest co-host even, we'll call him, Bryan Eastridge. Hey, buddy.
Hey, how's it going?
Going great.
I self-muted there for a minute. So.
Oh, that's great.
See, he's
so trained up as host of his own podcast, the Off Duty On Duty podcast. He knows how to work the mic setup. So, guys, today is a special episode. I'm happy to have Bryan on as a guest. We're going to be talking about the title of this episode, Sub-Second Draws and Your Priorities, a topic that's been kind of heated in recent days online. I've seen a number of conversations and posts and forums and things discussing the whole idea of chasing that sub-second draw. So Bryan's been involved in some of those conversations. So I thought, hey, let's have Bryan on. Let's give it a whirl. Let's talk it over. But first, before we get into our topic today, I want to mention that our sponsors today are first, Bryan's very own EDC belt company, Foundation Belt. We can't have them on the podcast and not have the Foundation Belt be sponsoring the show. And of course, we're proud dealers of the Foundation Belt at concealedcarry.com. In fact, the short link, if you care, you can go to concealedcarry.com/foundation. That'll take you right to the product page. And so super excited to have Bryan on again as always. And I'm a proud wearer and I'd say representative, I guess, of the Foundation Belt. I've been wearing it for, I don't even know how long now, Bryan, but since you sent me one, I haven't looked back.
Yeah, that's been well over a year ago. And
over a year, easy. I was thinking I think we're probably more in the 2-year ballpark at this point.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's not a solo endeavor. So big shout out to David and Kristen. I was over there at the shop today doing some work. And if you've worn, or if you've purchased one in the last year, Mrs. Kristen has personally sewn that. So she does fabulous work. I make the joke now that, I always get seconds because, if we can't sell it, then I'll get a new belt. I'll grab a second. Well, she's so good at it now that I never get sample seconds anymore, or
right.
I'd have a vendor or somebody to call me and say, hey, I'd like to get a sample just to see what this is all about. I'd go, okay, well, I'm going to send you a second. Don't sell it. Don't display it. Just, it wears fine. It's got a bad stitch or something. I don't get those anymore. So yeah,
awesome.
No, it's a good problem.
And I've got some older belts. I think I believe I have one of the since Mrs. Kristen made belts as well. Uh, but you know what? Everything I have has been really solid, and they're high quality belts. I was using a belt of a similar design from another manufacturer prior to getting one of yours. And I mean, what yours does better than the others that are out there that are similar. And that's the thing. People might look at these and go, well, I've seen this one, I've seen that one, and I've seen this foundation one. And maybe this one over here is, a couple dollars cheaper or whatever. And I just want to tell you that they're not only made well in your shop in Oklahoma, but it's just a better design, period, because it's stiff where you need it and not stiff where you don't need it. That's what I always say. That's like my own personal little slogan. It's stiff where you need it and not where you don't.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, your belt doesn't need to be stiff across your back unless you're carrying small back, which if you are, repent.
Just stop it. Stop it.
But otherwise, like, you need stiffness where, over the primary portion of the body where you're carrying your gear. So having that more flexible section across the small of my back, much more improved in comfort. The belt just wants to conform to my body better. Keep in mind when you have a belt that's of uniform thickness and stiffness throughout it, that you're trying to stuff an oval-shaped body inside something that wants to be a circle. And so just that paints a little picture and kind of helps you understand that that's where you create some kind of pinch points, not necessarily pinching, but that's kind of what they feel like in some of the corners of your body, because you're trying to make that round belt that's stiff go around your oval shaped body or bean shaped body. So anyway, just don't want to go too deep into it, but guys, appreciate Foundation Belt, EDC Belt Company, Bryan here being with us and being a sponsor of today's show. Also, today's episode brought to you by the 2021 Guardian Conference. Jacob and I just did a whole episode talking about it a few episodes ago, so I'm not going to try to be long-winded about this either. But other than, if you enjoy the content, the things we talk about here today, if you like and appreciate Bryan's teaching there. Bryan's doing a Skill Builder 50 course, where you basically are going to myth bust the fundamentals of shooting. And you and I have shared a lot of conversations about some of those things, and think very similarly about a lot of those topics. So some of which we're going to kind of, today's topic kind of borderlines on that as well. So anyway, point is, you're going to be teaching there, doing a great class. I know people are going to benefit from going through that class. So come check out Bryan Eastridge. Come check out the whole rest of our staff, amazing world-class instructors at the Guardian Conference 2021, about a month away, a little bit more than a month. So we're getting down there. I mean, there's still time to get in. We still do have tickets available. So it's feasible that we could be sold out at some point. I don't know if we're gonna hit that point, but we're getting really, like, I'm super excited that we have as many people attending as we do. So plus you're getting within that window where if you're not already coming, you might want to commit now, because if you got to buy a plane ticket or make other travel arrangements, you're kind of hitting that point where you need to do so. So anyway, guys, go to guardianconference.com to learn about the conference and get signed up. Hope to see you there. Could be a great weekend of training.
And unfortunately, my spare bedroom's spoken for. So if you're looking for a place to stay, sorry.
Oh, dang, I thought that's where I was staying.
It's a full size, and Michael's coming in. So
okay, we could share. We could make it full work.
I got a bed, I got a couch, so office couch over here.
Well, let's get into it, Bryan. So, again, today's topic inspired somewhat by recent events. There's been a lot of talk about sub-second draws and the prioritization of resources and skills, which is a worthwhile conversation to have. And in fact, not too long ago, Jacob and I think it was the two of us. It could have been Matthew, but I'm pretty sure it was me and Jacob who did a whole episode talking about skills that were, I don't remember the exact title, but it was like skills that are more important than, like being able to reload or something to that, or carrying a spare mag. That's what it was. It was less about the skill side, is more about things that you should be carrying or doing besides carrying a spare mag. And so this is an episode probably of a similar vein. Uh, and so I kind of want to ask you, Bryan. I mean, where did this, in your mind, this recent kerfuffle of sorts, internet kerfuffle, get kicked off for you? I mean, I've participated in so many online conversations about it recently. I kind of forget where it all started. I mean, there's not like one hard start point, but it does seem like there's been this uptick in people discussing it.
Yeah, and I take full responsibility for that.
There you go.
Well, and honestly, I reached this point where I'm, I mean, I'm tuned into the social media stuff, and I'm having this dinner with some of the, some of my like peers, mentors, and we're sitting around the dinner table, and I'm going to throw him under the bus now because he gave me permission to. But my brother from another mother, Daryl Bulkey, who is notorious for throwing out a golden nugget that just has a ring to it, I was like, I don't get this obsession with, and it seems to go hand in hand with the, the red dot carrying thing. And it's like this whole sub-second draw to first shot. Like that's some kind of barometer for like exceptional performance at 6 feet or something. I'm like, okay, it's a cool it's a great execution of technical skills. It's awesome. And he goes, yeah, but show me a guy that's got a consistent sub-second draw. I'll show you a guy that should have spent a lot more time working on something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, I'm going to write that down, dude. And he goes, permeate it to the internet and make them mad. I don't care. And I talked to him later and he's like, yeah, I'll take credit for it. So, I posted that up anonymously. And like an hour later, my phone, people that I have met one time in my life that we have this virtual like acquaintanceship are like, hey dude, we need to talk. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, what was that about? And as I started to kind of explore it, and I'm like, hey, look, that's fine. But I think we're just putting entirely too much emphasis on something that is a complete anomaly. You know what I mean? And so I started looking at it from the competition side, right? I was like, well, okay, let me look at it from that aspect. Steel challenge. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You need it, right? Yep. Or you're not even competitive anymore.
Because every string you have 4 draws. So if you're a 1 second draw in steel challenge, that's 4 seconds of your 4 stages or 4 runs in that stage.
Yeah.
So if you can shave off even a 10th, that might be just enough to win a match or win a championship even. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I'm like, okay, there's a really good place for it there. Okay, let's talk USPSA. What it like 99% of the stages that I see, and I haven't shot in quite some. I think the last match I shot was 2-3 years ago, USPSA. And it was like, start here, move to that shooting box, and that's where you're going to start shooting. And I went, so the draw doesn't really have a bearing on that other than it needs to be there when I get to where I'm going to shoot. So I said, okay. And I mean, there's some skills exercises, some standards courses that it really plays a benefit in. And I go, okay, so I can see the emphasis and effort in that. And then I go, okay, PPC, I never needed it. Get the gun up within about 1.5, 2 seconds, get it anchored and start shooting. Well, all right. Do I need to have it under a second? And then I go, okay, concealment. If I'm going to carry this gun in the real world out here amongst the, in the constitutional United States, does it behoove me to be able to have a draw to first shot in under a second? And I'm like, okay, so let me look at the scenarios where this could play out. Bad guys looking away from me, and I need to get the gun in expeditiously. Well, I'm carrying a handgun. The most predictable outcome in bullet performance is we have no idea how it's going to perform out of a handgun. We just don't. We have measurements, but realistically, no, we can't predict that's going to be an instant fight stopper. It might be the determinant factor in the overall outcome at some point. So I go, well, it's not real critical there. Person's drawn down on me. Give me your wallet, and giving me a barrage of profanity. And I look at it from that aspect and I go, that's scary, right? I mean, that's a pretty scary situation. Looking down the muzzle of somebody's gun or worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the time to try to bring the pistol into play? And even doing that, can we guarantee that we're going to get a showstopper right out of the gate? And is there more probability that under that degree of fear, and I had this conversation with another friend of mine last night. I said, have you ever been scared? And he's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, no, I mean like scared, like on the verge of in the red panic. Have you ever experienced that? And he's like, oh, and I'm like, what's your biggest fear? Oh, I'm afraid of heights. And I'm like, okay, imagine you're hanging on the side of the building by one hand and you're screaming for help. And that's the level of terror you're going to be in. And you are going to have the mechanical aptitude to pull all this together in that moment. Probably not. The best Major League Baseball players all have something in common. They all strike out pretty regularly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like in that situation, the wheels are probably going to come off. They're not going to stay attached to the car. If they do, you're miraculous. You're a hero. And we're probably going to have drills named after you and all kinds of stuff, right? So I'm like, so the practical applicability there is maybe not there. And then on the other side of that, I look at the other side of that coin and I go, what if this person, in these gunfight videos and stuff that we're seeing all over the interwebs now, we're not taking into account that we have no idea what that person's background with a handgun is, right? So how do we not know that person goes, okay, it's game on. And I know because I've had X amount of hours training that I can pull a sub-second draw to first shot. How do we know that's not what got them inspired to introduce the gun into the situation and ultimately get killed? We don't. I mean, that's a variable we can't account for.
Yeah.
So I go, in the practical realm of shooting, I don't see that we need to put such the emphasis on it. I mean, I just gave like 5 scenarios, right? And 5 different applications and a couple of different like force on force applications. And it's like, okay, what's the penalty if the wheels come off in a USPSA match? Maybe I second or third or 10th or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Or a steel challenge. What's the penalty if the wheels come off in real life? I shoot somebody that doesn't need to be shot. I launch my gun towards the bad guy. I fumble. I get caught up in my clothes and I ultimately get shot, right? Or get killed. Or maybe that's the one thing that now inspires bad guy to go, I've got to kill him now instead of rob him.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of maybe this surreptitious draw, or as Spalding and some of the other guys call it. So I look at that and I go, so what would be a better usage of time? Thinking through these scenarios or trying to master a mechanical technique? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it? So that was,
yeah.
And I got a lot more wordy. I kind of like compressed
Yeah.
all this into one thing that has been kind of dribbled out over the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I'm not telling you don't do that. Don't have that skill. I'm just saying, compress it into the thinking portion, mm-hmm. and it will pay off way more than just the mechanical application of it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do want to explore that a bunch more in today's episode.
Yeah.
Because that is, I mean, what you're touching on there is huge for all of us concealed carriers listening to mm-hmm. This podcast. But first, I do want to ask, if you don't mind me kind of diving off into this mm-hmm. part of this discussion first, and it has to do with this, let's just call it the standards, if you will, or the standard. And so what I mean by that is, I don't think we can answer the question of how fast is fast enough, right? Because that's dependent on so many variables and factors. But if we were to and this discussion has, or this very thing has come up in this conversation recently, and it is the idea of, well, at what point do we go, oh, I probably can focus my time and effort and resources elsewhere. I don't need to be pursuing going, faster than this. I'm probably where I need to be for now. What is that time standard, if we can put it into that context? I've heard some numbers thrown out, and I think I know about where that would be, and kind of how you would respond, but I'd like to hear how you'd address that.
If you can 100% of the time hit a 1.5 draw to first shot, I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
I see that is in the realm of human function that is not holster dependent. It's not age, dexterity dependent,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's doable in the normal earth people realm.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us that train pretty frequently, I live right around a 1.25 at 100%. That means every single time that gun comes out of the holster, but I live in that range inside of 10 yards. Beyond 10 yards, the draw to first shot slows down substantially,
Mm-hmm.
all the way back to 25.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not the draw portion that slows down, it's the first shot portion,
Mm-hmm.
because we have way more decision.
Greater refinement of sights, for one, just looking at
Mm-hmm.
the mechanics of shooting a pistol. To continue, though, with you were saying something about decisions.
Yeah. There's more decision time there. And what I mean by decision time is I couple that, I need to refine the sights. Well, that's decision time.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I have to be precise with this, more precise. I have to see more information at distance than I do in close. If your target is 4 times bigger than your sights, you don't need a whole lot of information to hit that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if your target is 1/4 the size of your sights, you now have to really refine that, which takes time. And, that's one thing I think that, for the people that accuse me of being anti-red dot, that is one thing that the red dot has over iron sights, period. There is no question about it, is that at distance, I can make that decision faster because I have a perfect sight picture every single time, right? There's no, it's a little, okay, I've got to square it up and get a little more crisp on the front sight. So, I mean, it's point and click, right? It's Nintendo generation, right? But yeah, so I kind of look at that 1.5 is just kind of that's just a really good standard. And when I came in to shooting, it was all about a sub 2-second draw. I mean, wrap your mind around that. Like a 175 was awesome. And, as people quit carrying leather holsters and started going to this newfangled plastic that doesn't collapse on the gun, and people started shooting striker fired guns as opposed to like 1911s. I mean, let's just face it, that was the prevalent gun when I got into shooting. Thank you, Clinton assault weapons ban, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was like, well, I can't carry 17 rounds of 9. Let's shove an 8-round, 47D in my whatever and get after it. Well, so those times kind of really fluctuated, but yeah, everybody's like, yeah, if you can get on target in under 2 seconds, you're doing something from concealment. And now we know, well, I that was a little generous, but for the era, it was pretty applicable.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of look at, like, once I've hit, if I can hit 100% at a 1.5, that's better than hitting 80% at sub-second, because Murphy's Law is that the 20% time is going to happen when you need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense? Like,
yep.
But we practice that, that refinement process to where we can, we can achieve a sub-second draw. But when it's go time, do we want to risk the wheels are going to come off of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
yeah. So And that's the number I thought you'd throw out, and that's a number that's been used for some time now, I would say, in the
Hmm.
industry, amongst a number of trainers, including well-known trainers that kind of use that 1.5 second standard. Uh, Dave Spalding does, his what is it, his 2x2 drill, or I think that's what it's called. That's his 7-yard drill on a 3x5 card. And the goal is to get 2 hits on it in less than 2 seconds. And so that, again, kind of puts you in that 1.5 second realm. Get that first shot off, and half a second's an eternity to
Hmm.
get a second shot on a 3x5 card at that distance. So, and again, there's other examples in a few other instructors' standards and drills and things they do in classes that kind of reinforce that 1.5 second par time, if you will.
Hmm.
So, like you, I agree with all of that you said, as far as, yeah, like a 100% success rate at 1.5 seconds is better than an 80% success rate at 0.99 seconds. And I would say this much, just to put myself out there as an example, which I'm willing to do, that I'm definitely capable of sub-second shots on target. In fact, I would say at 7 yards on a USPSA A zone, I could probably do it 90 to 95% of the time, or at least be like half an inch at the most out. It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
like it's right there. So it's not quite 100% performance every single time at 7 yards on A zone, but it's really, really close. So what I've recognized in myself is when I'm trying to achieve something that requires 100% performance, then I back that, like, I just naturally intuitively back that off a little bit, and I'm somewhere in the 1.15 to 1.25 range, and
Yeah.
that is 100%, like, all day long. Like, that's
Yeah.
like, it's like I'm asleep at the wheel, that it feels like it's, oh, yeah, so 1.5 seconds. I've demonstrated that for students sometimes as a demonstration, like, hey, this is like, 'cause I actually like to do that. That's something I stole from Scott Jedlinski, and that's something I really like how he does it and how he teaches in his classes is he'll demonstrate what he'll call I think he calls it the national standard, and then he has what he calls his class standard, and then he has his black belt standard. And so it's
Hmm.
sort of like, here's where there's some national consensus that you should be with this skill. Then here's where I really want you to try to be after, in my class or by the time you finish my class. And then here's my top tier GM level performance black belt standard, right?
Hmm.
And he demonstrates those different standards and shows, hey, this is what 2 seconds or 1.75 getting a shot on target is like. Draw, bang, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I've kind of stolen that from him because I like that, because it shows, I think, there's some really good lessons that can be learned when you demonstrate things at a little bit slower pace,
Yeah.
than when you're doing it at max speed all the time, right? And I've always tried to, like, do something kind of in the middle, but
Hmm.
now I've sort of gotten to where I will show the slow standard, and then I'll show kind of a medium standard, and then a fast, like, here's the top standard kind of thing. And what I like about it is the student can see, hey, this is very doable, and you're going to see it feels like an eternity. And here's where most of you probably are going to be at. And then here's what, like, really going is like. And it
Hmm.
just kind of, I think as I went through his class, it sort of created this context as a student. I'm like, oh, like, it just made a lot of things click. It also gives you opportunities as an instructor to show things like you talked about, how your draw speed at 7 yards versus 25 yards should remain the same. It's the shot that you take that should be slower. Uh, and that's something I've taught for a long time, that, hey, whether I'm uh, going, whether I'm shooting 3 yards or 50 yards, my draw is always pretty much the same level speed, or at least it'll appear to be such.
Yeah.
Demonstrating things slowly and then demonstrating them at max speed, I'll intentionally demonstrate it that way, where it's like, what could you tell me about my draw speed when I was shooting this 2 second standard? Oh, it was the same as when you were going max speed. You see how much time that gave me to make a
Mm-hmm.
really good shot? Click, click, click,
Right.
click,
Right.
light bulbs going off, like, "Oh." Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to take too much
No.
time from you to but that's kinda where I'm at in my thought process. I'd like to bounce that off of you.
Yeah. That, you know, I came out of retirement in 2018 from shooting matches, and I got really inspired to shoot this concealed carry league match that CCW Safe was putting on.
Mm,
And there was a couple of competitors in there that I'd watch them go over to the safe area and they'd put on a Glock 34 with a Terran tactical everything on it and all
mm,
this stuff after they took their Glock 19 off and parked it in a bag.
mhm,
And I was like, this is a concealed carry match. It's like, it's supposed to be walk in and pressure test your gear.
mhm,
That was kind of the spirit of it, right? It
mhm.
was kind of like the original intent of IDPA that has gone through many iterations,
Yes.
but it was like, and most of the courses were fairly revolver neutral. But there was heavy penalty for inaccuracy, heavy time penalty.
Mhm,
And so I shot one of the end of the series matches and I placed pretty good. And they're like, oh man, yeah, these guys over here, this group of dudes over here, man, they're walking in off the street and they're changing their gear out and they're doing all these things. And I went, okay, well, I'm going to come back next year and beat them. And they're like, that's a bold statement. And I said, been doing this a while. I know how to train. And what I saw was, okay, I need to make my 80% performance better than them outrunning their headlights.
mhm,
I need to make my comfort zone be their 100% max. And then I never need to waver from that.
mhm,
So all through the league, I bet I won like 2 stages total in the whole league running, maybe 3. I don't know, but over like league overall, every match, I was in the top 3 or 4 and I win the overall by a landslide. And people are like, and I said, yeah, because I have the consistency to know this is my 80% is going to beat your 100%. And I don't mean to sound arrogant about that. It's just, I understand how to train to get there.
mhm,
Um, and I did it with my carry gear that I would literally walk into the range, shoot it, load my social ammo up and leave. And guys were just like, oh, how do you do that? I'm like, well, I know what a sub-second draw looks like, but this has a lot of decision making and a lot of processing and a lot of critical accuracy. So I need to shoot at a pace that I can do that 100% of the time and not waver from it and still do, draw expeditiously, move from target array to target array expeditiously, um, game it, so to speak, meaning I'm going to shoot on the move with accuracy where these guys are moving from point to point and then setting up and shooting. And, you know, and after that series, it was like people were picking my brain about it. And I'm like, did draw speed come out to amount to much? No. Did shot to shot split times? No. It was all hinging on accuracy and efficiency.
mhm.
Right. So
Yep.
that's how I set my training schedule up. Okay. I'm going to shoot 2-inch dots until I can't stand it. And then I'm going to practice getting into a position. And as soon as my feet clear the box, shooting 2-inch dots because I have an 8-inch circle to shoot at. So if I can hit those every time, we're good. Right.
Mhm,
So, and what I'm getting at with all of that is pushing your boundaries is awesome. Pushing your performance limits is awesome. But when you step up to the plate in the majors the first time, and probably the only time you're ever going to have to do that in your life, unless you're in the military or something like that, do you want to bank on I'm going to crash and burn? Do I want to even take that risk?
mhm,
Or do I want to have this comfort zone to where my 80% of my max is better than anybody else on the block? So,
yeah,
and to me, the 80% is 1.25 and 0.35 splits. That's just that's where I kind of live. And even people that are not involved in our industry, when they see that kind of stuff, man, it's intimidating. Right. I
mhm,
mean, so as we're trying to mentor new shooters and they go surfing the Instagram and all this stuff, and they see all these superhuman performances, it is extremely intimidating. And it's like, you know, that's all cool, but you really don't need to get to that level to protect yourself with a firearm.
Yeah.
You know, you're much better off going and taking a class on situational awareness. You know what I mean? Like, let's avoid the fight. But if you have to, the level of proficiency that you need versus what I see a lot in the industry of are two separate things. But that's a sliding scale too. There's no real way to quantify this is how much you need all the time.
Yep.
Right.
Which is a point that we made earlier on in the episode here, that like how good is good enough? It's a question that can't really be answered. But you know, like to that 1.5 second par time for a draw to first shot, that's a pretty widely industry accepted standard at this point, I would say. That because there's numerous examples, hundreds, thousands perhaps, where that level of skill is going to get the job done. Now, we can also point to examples where faster than that was needed. We can also point to plenty of examples where slower or draw speed was not a factor at all.
Yeah.
Which you kind of touched on already. So, you know, it's yeah, you've got to make the decision. I think as an individual, you got to know yourself and know what you can do, what you're capable of, and get to a point where it's like, oh, all right, I have achieved, you know, I've gotten that 80% that I needed to get out of whatever skill, because to get that remaining 20% is going to require infinitely more work. And that's how it works. You know, the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rules, it's known. It's relatively easy, I would say, in the overall scheme of things. It's relatively easy to get to 80% of whatever top level is. But beyond that, it's you know, it's a logarithmic or exponential, you know, growth curve of this much more effort to go this much further on the scale of proficiency. And so we got to make that decision ourselves of where is enough, where is, have I hit the point where enough is enough for this? And I would add, as long as, and I think there's a caution here, and I had this, you know, you saw my comment earlier today on a related post. As long as I think we're not allowing that to create a sense of complacency, like, oh, I got to this level, I could just chill for a while, meaning like not touch the gun at all and not practice and keep things sharp. You know, like you need to, if you're there, like you need to remain there. And I think the way we remain there is, because I don't believe in static progress. Like you're either going up or you're going down, right? It's always an up or it's a down. It's an up and it's a down. As we were working on things, working on skills, improving, and then maybe we don't practice for 2 weeks. And during that 2 weeks, yeah, everyone knows when you go to the range cold and you haven't touched a gun in 2 weeks, you're like, you can't expect that normal, whatever performance is that is normal for you. It's going to be degraded somewhat. And so there's no such thing as like holding a skill perfectly static and not doing anything. You're either working on something to improve upon it or you're not. And you know, there's going to be a point where it's like, well, if I do 20 minutes a week, it will keep me where I need to be and maybe slightly progressing. Whereas to get to that, it took, you know, X number of hours, like took me 2 hours per week for 6 months to even get to that level. But now I'm there, it takes, you know, 20% of the effort to keep that 80% skill where it needs to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's absolutely accurate. I'll tell you, my practice sessions nowadays are very, very pointed and very brief, because all I'm trying to do is just keep those skills honed. And it does not take, to maintain that, it does not take as much effort as people think it does. It doesn't take as much time, but it does take structure. And that's where a lot of people miss as well. I mean, how many people do we know that go to the range and I always say, you know, the big blue Smurf target, right? The B-27 that's painted blue to, you know, I guess so they don't have to pay royalties on it or whatever. And they stick that up and they've got 100 rounds of ammo, which, you know, is $60+ now. And plus they've paid range fees, and they go out there and they turn money into noise.
Mm-hmm.
And they get no feedback from that. They get no, and when I go to the range, I go with 40 rounds, 40. I make myself go with just 40 rounds. And I say, this is what I'm going to do. And I do everything cold, everything, because the one commonality in every single gunfight in the continental United States is they're all cold performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they are. I mean, well, I take that back. There's only one that I can recall, and it happened at a national level event. I won't go into it, but it was a police shooting competition where some guys loaded their service guns and went to lunch and got robbed in the parking lot.
Yeah.
That did not turn out good for the bad guy. Didn't even make a blurb on the news, but that was the only time I've ever gone, yeah, that wasn't a cold performance. Those dudes were tuned up. Much to the misfortune of the bad guy.
Yeah.
But there again, I look at, okay, like I wrote that 2.5 second standard course. You saw me pitch out there. I did that, and there's a lot more thought behind that than I think people, they were kind of like, well, what about this? And I'm like, I don't care how you're carrying your gun. I don't care what start position you go from. 2.5 seconds to accomplish the task. Can you move this from here to here in this time limit? That's it. But if you go into the draw to first shot times and the split times, if you maintain a 1.5 or less draw and you shoot at a 0.35 assessment time speed, it's perfectly achievable regardless of how you're carrying the gun, platform, appendix, outside. You may do it faster from an appendix rig than you do from a strong side rig, but did you still achieve the task? Yeah, absolutely. And there's some challenging marksmanship stuff in there. And that's that good balance of, it's 15 rounds. Like, mix it up. I start from the holster. I start from the gun in my hand, low ready, all these different things if you want to. But it's all the shot times. It's like, it's perfectly achievable if you will stay in the realm of normal human function. I mean, I can go out there and blaze that course and do everything in 1.7, 1.8. Do I achieve the same thing? Yeah. But cold, that's where the wheels will start to fall off.
Yeah.
Cold 2.5 for all those tasks, golden. And it's challenging even to somebody that's a higher level shooter, but it's also the structure was calculated. And it was to like force you to go, I don't care what your draw speed is, this part's going to be harder for you. Okay, I know you've got a fat or a slower draw. This part, the shot times aren't terribly demanding, but and I equate that a lot to like the guy that really got me thinking about that stuff was Justin Dial, the 5-yard roundup. How can I take 10 rounds and get all this training involved in it and have it be an exercise I can go to the range cold and go, ooh, yeah, that didn't turn out good, or that did, or and cover all these different skills. So
that's kind of also like, it reminds me of although it's not quite as well rounded, but it is a measure of consistent performance, and that is it's Gila Hayes' 5x5 drill, which Greg Elfrid's and I think Cloud Warner, I think actually Greg maybe took it from Cloud, but I think I'm pretty sure it was Cloud that recommended doing that 5 times back to back to back to back. If you could do that 5x5 drill 5 times in a row successfully, like that's great on demand cold performance level stuff. It's 5 shots at 5 yards on a 5-inch circle. It's not in a 5-second part time. I mean, that is an eternity for a relatively skilled shooter of any sort to get that done. But doing it 5 times back to back to back to back, it's easy to somewhere along the way kind of lose focus a little bit or get a little bit lackadaisical about it, and drop some shots. And so again, not as well rounded as like your drill or Justin Dial's 5-yard roundup, but just it's I kind of put it in a similar category of it's achievable, absolutely achievable, for reasonable level performance, you just got to do it. Before we got kind of lost along the way here, there's one thing I wanted to go back and touch on, because you mentioned something, and I was like, oh yeah, that's really good. I think that's a really meaty concept that could, we could spend more time on it. We don't have all the time in the world to spend on it right now, but I wanted to hit on it. When you were talking about your 80% beating some of those guys is 100%, particularly over the course of a match, it reminded me of some similar things have been in my mind in relatively recent history. I had some really great conversations with Charlie Perez, who's been on the podcast, and a few other folks. And some of that is my own realization of watching some of the best in the sport. But by that meaning the competitive shooting sports like USPSA and IDPA, and watch them perform in major matches. And, a common observation that I've heard other people make even is, well, wow, Rob Latham or Max Michel or whatever, made that look easy. Didn't look like they were really pressed for time or hurrying or rushing. I mean, they were fast, no doubt, but like they made it look easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason for that is these top tier guys, they don't go to the matches and shoot at 100% of their max performance for the whole match, because, well, it doesn't matter whether it's you or Max Michel, but your 100% is right at that threshold of, I go over 100%, wheels are probably going to fall off the bus. If I can be below that and be within my comfortable operating range, but if I exceed that 100%, think I can do something, but I misjudge. That shot's a little bit tighter, more difficult than I thought. I don't have the foot positioning I need, the balance with, like, it doesn't take much, and you are falling apart when you're riding right at that 100% threshold. So for max performance at a major match, a big match, and this could be true, I think, of defensive situations too. Like, you don't want to be at 100%. You want to be comfortably operating at 90% or even 80% at times, because you can do it again and again and again, repeatedly, consistently. And so that's really opened my mind to, because I have a hard time not constantly giving it my all with whatever I do, especially if it's competitive in nature, because I'm a competitive person. It's like, oh yeah, let's go. I'm going to give it 100%. And there's times where, like, it goes awesome, right? But then there's times where it goes really badly. And so when you look at, I've shot some matches this year where I had stage wins, and I had 50 to 60% stage finishes too, all in the same match. Mm-hmm. Up, down, up, down, up, down, some stuff in the middle, up, down, up, down. But then you look at some of the top guys, and what is it? 85 to 95% with some stage wins, here and there. And just, I mean, maybe it depends on who else is competing in the field too. Obviously, when it's Max and or Rob Latham, and there's nobody else that's even close to their level, like it's they're going to win every stage, whatever. But in a big match where multiple top level guys they're competing, like, you look at where they're finishing, and it's somewhere in that 90% range very consistently. Mm-hmm. And that's how they're operating too. Now, maybe when, like, there's times where it's like, hey, I'm a little bit behind and it's going to be risky, but I need to try to make up something here. So it might be a strategy decision to push it that little extra bit to try to get back in front. And there's certainly examples, I think, on the defensive side where it's like, hey, this problem can be solved with 90% performance all day long, but maybe this problem over here is not that at all. And, like, this is the worst case scenario. And, like, I have no other choice but to give it my 100%. I have to do a sub-second draw here or I'm toast, right? Like, that kind of situation can exist as well. And the point is I think, and this is part of the decision-making piece, I think, too, Brian, and we need to spend some more time talking about that, is making decisions about how you are, like, what level of performance you are giving. in a strategic way. You know, if I have a deadly force encounter and I'm able to, in the moment, kind of go, hey, you know what? This is scary. It's bad, but this is well within my capabilities. I can handle this. Okay, 90% performance. Let's go. You know, like we could do this. If it's really really bad, then it's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be dead in the next second anyway if I don't do X Y Z thing. So being able to read the situation and apply yourself correctly, I think is, and I'm saying this as a competitor. This is something that I'm seeing in myself in my own failures to become a top level competitor. Is I make bad judgment of maybe I shouldn't give 100% or 95% even effort on a stage because of this and this thing that is high risk and is probably going to fall apart. I just need to be a little bit smarter. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Any thoughts about that long monologue I just gave?
It's all the whole purpose of where that conversation I was having at dinner came from. Literally everything you're saying on the competition side is exactly what we were talking about on the training defensive side, right?
Yep.
Daryl made the statement to me one time. He goes, if I had back every bullet, every round I shot trying to get from a 1.7 to a 1.5 split, I'd have a garage full of ammo to train with, you know? And I said, yeah, but in that era, that was like what everybody wanted to be able to do. And the matches consequently were structured to do that. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. You know, so as all of this stuff has progressed, it's kind of like we're getting the 50,000 foot view of a lot of this, how the competition training defensive side all molds together. And, you know, and even the law enforcement side, right? We're getting a much broader picture of these things, you know, with mass media. I mean, you can read about an officer involved shooting and go watch the video 2 days, 3 days later in the press release. You know, it's unheard of. And what we're seeing is a lot of the stuff that a lot of the defensive guys were preaching in the 70s. Like it's really weird how what's old kind of is new again with a lot of the concepts. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that is, you know, on the competition side, if I can run 80% and just not ever place top in a stage and I win the overall every single time, hey, win-win, right? I never had to press the gas. I never had to, you know, and you and I in a conversation, you mentioned a particular stage that some guys kind of had a little side wager going on, and all these top level shooters shot the stage for score in one time, and then when they pressed the gas, it was almost, you know, they shaved like 50% of their time off of it, and it's like, whoa, hey, there's something to that, right? On the defensive side, the penalties for error are so much higher.
Oh, no
And
doubt.
so, you know, the one time I've discharged my gun on duty, the first question I got asked was, hey, are you all right? Yep. Okay. Hey, what was behind what you were shooting at? Like,
Yeah,
huh?
because your guys want to know so they can go check.
Exactly.
Did anybody else get hurt?
Right. And it wasn't a rib. It wasn't a needle. It was like, okay. And then, you know, it was a dog shooting. I mean, it was a pretty intense situation, but still at the same time, it was like, I had processed, okay, when this occurs, this is where I'm going to start shooting because there's a house here, there's a gas meter, there's all these other things that can be a real, and there's a long alley here that there's nobody in. And I know at the trajectory that I'm shooting, all those things were processed up here before the first shot went off. And I'm like, I can't recreate that for you on a flat range. What I can do is give you a skill set to where when you're running the gun on almost autopilot, and I mean autopilot on the fundamental side, like you're making the gun go off when you want it to go off, and to free up the processing speed of what are all these other external factors, right? So yeah. So there gets to be a real disconnect there when people are, well, I got a sub-second draw to first shot. Okay, well, let's back the bus up. What's behind the target? Ballistic berm. It's not going to be there. There might be a car. There might be a kid in a stroller.
Mhm.
Like, let's put some context to some of these things. So the actual execution of those fundamental tasks and those, those high level skill sets, it's all excellent. It's all great stuff. But and I see this in the training industry all the time, where the backdrop falls, or the context of a lot of that stuff falls, is getting lost.
Mhm.
And that bothers me, especially being a trainer, where I'm like,
Yeah.
I live in the realm of this, but
Yeah. Well,
am I,
I I think we're in a place though where performance shooting,
Mhm.
high performance shooting, has become its, like, there are people today out there, like, that is their pursuit,
Mhm.
right? It's all about, where can I shave not even tenths, but like hundreds of seconds off of things. Because that's their jam. That's what floats their boat. That's what, where they get. That's what excites them. So,
Mhm.
and I think that we're at a place where that has become widespread. More than it ever has been. I mean, we have, social media has responsibility for that. Obviously, I mean, the fact that people can put themselves out there and be like, "Hey, look what I can do,"
Mhm.
and like that's an exciting thing to be able to demonstrate a high level of skill with a gun. But it is just that, it is high performance shooting and not really anything else in a practical sense. I mean, some of those skills can be applied practically, but
Mhm.
my point is, there are people out there, like, that's their jam, is
Yeah.
about being the fastest guy on Instagram. Hey, that rhymed pretty good.
I'm I'm gonna call. I think I'm gonna title my next, when I retire. I'm compiling a book of like 4 and 8 hour classes, and they're constantly a work in progress.
Mhm.
Right. I think I think I'm gonna title one "Practical Performance Thinking," uh, instead of shooting.
Mhm.
And that's not a knock at
Mhm.
anything, but is, how do we bridge some of that barrier between, where does the rubber meet the road with practical shooting and defensive shooting?
Mhm.
And the biggest thing I see where they really conflict is, like you said, in goals. What am I trying to achieve here?
Mhm.
Am I trying to achieve it because it's going to help me win a match, uh, or is that freeing up my mind to think about other things? And how do I
Mhm.
simulate other things? Like, um, so, and let's face it. I mean, I would not want to be on the other side of Jerry Mitchell's gun or Rob Latham's gun ever. Like, period.
Yeah.
Like, you know, uh, any more so than I would want to get. And I'll throw Cecil's name out there. Cecil and I had a conversation about this. He and I were talking about this very thing, and I said, man, if you got your mitts on me, there ain't a sub-second draw in the world that will save me from what's
Mhm.
coming. I'm
Mhm.
like, please just tell me what you're going to do so I can mentally prepare for the lights going out. Okay, cool. Like, just ask me before you choke me out. Cool. Right. And
And
he
just for
said,
context, for people that may not know,
oh
Cecil
yeah,
Birch, right?
yeah. Cecil Birch who is a fabulous instructor, in practice, what I would call, like, he's probably one of the most well-rounded martial arts guys I've ever met. And he's a great shooter too. Uh, but he's like, yeah, but if you got away from me and we went gun on gun, it would be,
Yeah.
I'd hand that one to you. And I go, okay, I don't want to get in a boxing match with a professional boxer. And I had this conversation with a couple other people that have been on my podcast, and they're like, any opportunity you get to, challenge somebody's lack of skill to play in your favor,
Mhm.
that's the route to pick, right?
Mhm.
I won't say the example that Rob Vaddis used, or Rob Latham used, but it's
Uh,
like, you know, I I don't want to, I don't want to challenge Lance Armstrong to a bike race, right?
yep.
You
Performance
know,
enhancing drugs or not.
yeah, exactly, right. I ride a bike for a living. I'm not in any danger of competing in the Tour de France, but that 80% is a good, comfortable level for me. Like, okay, well, I can go stay fit and I can stay functional. I can do all these things. I have a healthy understanding of it, a practical mastery of that task set. I understand how to achieve different goals and all these things, but I'm not in any jeopardy of going on a pro tour, right? Like that ship has sailed. Like, and that's where we get lost between defensive shooters and practical performance type stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you guys are the race car drivers. You're the Formula One, right? Formula One crashes a lot. I just want to be able to drive to work, man, like, and get there safely. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So, gosh, I'm coming up with all kinds of examples that are just falling out there. Sorry.
Well, so that kind of brings up another interesting angle to all of this, and it came up in, again, a discussion from earlier today on a Facebook post, and kind of something I had to say about that is, things don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? And so, kind of to build on what you were just saying there a moment ago, is there is this attitude a lot of times between the defensive community and the competitive community, or the defensive community and the high performance community, that is sort of like, well, you can be this or you can be that, but you can't really be, people don't come out and say it. Like, they don't come out and say you can't be both, but that's, by the way they argue things, that's sort of what's being implied. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily true. You can have a smart head on, about yourself. You can have good awareness and mindset and all these things. You can have good decision-making skills. Heck, you could have been through 100 iterations or evolutions of force-on-force scenarios, but you can also be a high-performance shooter, right? Now, that is a rare package, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that can be pursued if it's important enough to someone. Now, where I'm at, just use, and I said some things earlier that kind of were almost a dig against myself. I mean, like, I was talking about high performance shooters and doing stuff for the gram and stuff. Like, I put stuff out there. I show examples of shooting fast and drawing fast, and because I don't know, I get a thrill out of it. I think it's fun. I will say that what started me on this path several years ago was I wanted to get to a place where I could operate and shoot my gun at a subconscious level.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could definitely say at this point, I can shoot and run my gun at a subconscious level. I've passed that point.
Mm-hmm.
I keep pushing myself though, because I got to a place where it's like, this is fun, and I now have other goals of, like, I want to be top tier.
Yeah, you're in that 20% realm.
Oh yes. I'm at the place where I'm pretty dang good, but when I show up at a match that Max Michel is shooting, he still beats me by 20%, and it's like, dang, like,
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's going to take a lot more work to still, and I'm chiseling away at that. But and I'll say that I know my shooting performance in the most recent match I shot, where he was in attendance, was overall better than the previous time I shot against him. But my mistakes were more of a strategic or, decision-making level, not necessarily like what I could do shooting wise. I think has improved immensely, but I could have been smarter in my approach. So anyway, enough about that. My point here being, though, that I just wanted to ask you about this concept of mutual exclusivity. I mean, I just see so many arguments online where this seems to be the thing, where it's like this or that. Which side are you on?
Well, I'll put it, when it comes to training, I look at Dave Harrington broke that mold for me. He's like, are you training or are you practicing? Because you need to train to learn a new skill. You need to practice that skill. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are in perpetual training mode. Like, well, at some point you got to practice it. Right. And then I kind of look at it like this. I'm like, the world right now, the US is full of top level instructors, top flight, better than I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
I'm in no danger of running night vision and a suppressed rifle. So I don't do it anymore. Really, like that's not my thing. Some people want to go train with those people. That's awesome, but that ain't me. That's not what I do. And if I do something like that, it's like, well, okay, I just want to satisfy my curiosity and see what the technology progression's been and implementation methods and all these things. I'm in no danger of going to a USPSA sectional or regional match. So is going and taking a stage planning class, is that in my wheelhouse anymore? No, not really. The older I get, I look at, man, maybe I need to get like some pepper spray and some, maybe I need to call up my bro Cecil and go, hey, let get me tuned up here on the empty hand stuff. So you can pick and choose. And one of the things I see this very endemic in the training populace is we grab onto a cult of personality. And I don't mean that like derogatory. I mean, oh, well, this person, this is the way. And I go, well, okay, they have a great thing. Like, yeah, they have a great setup for that. But is that you? Is that what your goal is? Is that what you're looking for? And I equated a lot to the martial arts industry. When the UFC started, we had karate versus judo. We had wrestling versus this. And now what do we have? Mixed martial arts. We have these guys that are well-rounded at everything. Some might be a little better at this than that. But they know a lot about a lot instead a lot about one particular discipline. Right. So I look at the gun is no different. The gun is literally no different than that. It is a martial art. Well, are you going for speed? Are you going for accuracy? Are you going for performance on demand? Are you going for defense? Figure out what your goal is and don't get so locked in and attached to one particular person or training method or that's all you understand and that's all you can do. Think of it as a mixed martial art. Okay. Draw, that's one skill set. Draw to first shots, one skill set. Reloads are one skill set. If I can't get past pressing the trigger without moving the gun, all those skill sets are for naught, right? If I can't hit what I'm shooting at, it's pointless. So before you stack on one skill set, go determine what will make you well-rounded. That and I think that's where we could bridge the gap between performance shooting and defensive shooting a lot, a whole lot. I think if people would look at it more from the mixed martial arts perspective than just the pure marksmanship, pure performance, pure this, right?
Yeah, no, I that's a great point. The more well-rounded we are, and the more well-rounded we are, it's because we have a broader level of experience and perspective, and that's hugely valuable. I've trained with a number of the world's top defensive trainers as well as competitive shooting trainers, and there's guys I've trained with that would say stuff that other guys I've trained with would totally not agree with. Be like, no, I don't see it like that at all, and vice versa. And other guys would be kind of somewhere in the middle, or would kind of try to bridge those ideas. So, but what that does for an individual training with a bunch of different attitudes and perspectives and curriculums and people is that you can kind of start to see more of the whole. And because there is a lot more out there in this world than what we think we know. And the more we know, the more we realize we don't know, right? As some similar sayings go. right now I've been working my way through some of the, I'll call them classical works of shooting, or yeah, mostly shooting related books. Like right now I'm working on Fitzgerald's shooting book that's just called Shooting. Uh, I mean, stuff from like almost 100 years ago in the way they thought and approached things. And I mean, it was Dave Spalding that inspired me. He's like, you know, bro, read some of the classic works, broaden your mind. It was like, yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, it was something I was aware of some of that and thought, yeah, one day it'd be nice to read some of those things.
Yeah.
But it, I've read some things in some old books in recent history that I'm like, oh wow, like that still applies today. I've also read some things it's like, ooh, that doesn't work at all. We know that doesn't work, but you can see why
Mm-hmm.
they thought that or believed that or taught that back then. And there's a context of why that was the way they did things then. And it could be because the equipment was totally different. It could be because, tactics were totally different. The problems were different as far as, you know, I don't know,
I
just it's a different world now than it was 80 years ago. So like, and it just forms this broader level of frame of reference for you to then apply your current paradigm in, to and go, okay, now I like it just helps you understand and progress in your knowledge and skill even more.
Yeah. Daryl Daryl Bulkey made the statement on my podcast: the two greatest advancements we've had in the firearms training realm are sighting systems and lights.
Yeah.
And I got to say, the more I dig into Bill Jordan and Boots Askins and Fitzgerald and people like that,
Yeah.
that's pretty accurate statement.
Yeah.
So
Why did they do so much point shooting back in the day? Well, did
because
you see the guns they were shooting? Did you
well
see the lack of sights?
pre
See that they
pre
were
war
working in dark alleys and couldn't see what they were looking at anyway half the time?
yeah pre war Smith and Wessons, if the hammer was down, you couldn't see the sights. The hammer spur blocked them. Well, they developed whole shooting methods around that. Does that mean that we don't need to use sights now? No.
Right.
It's like, come on, like a lot of this, and I see a lot of carryovers, man. That's the other thing I struggle with when I go to a class is I see some carryovers of stuff that I'm like, really? And I mean, I'm not dogging on anybody.
Right.
It's just I'm like, I thought we already like I thought, Colonel Askins kind of settled that argument. Can we move past the last 100 years, or you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
there's things like that that still come up that I like beat my head against the wall going, oh no. But there again, there was purpose behind it. And if that's all you know, that's all you know. So,
But again, like understanding and realizing the why behind some things, and oh, that's why they taught that 80 years ago. Oh, like like that in of itself can answer questions and things that people still debate today. And it's like that it's like the classic pistol shooting diagnostic chart, right? That you go in any Facebook group and
yeah,
some dude posts up a target, and he hits where he's got, it looks like he shot the target with a 12 gauge buckshot. Hey guys, what could I do better? And inevitably, within 2 minutes of a post going up like that, somebody posts a diagnostic chart or target.
yeah,
Like, hey, like this should help you. And it's like, number one, a lot of times that stuff gets shared and kind of willy nilly and doesn't really do anything to help the person, because especially when their hits are all over, well, we're not seeing any consistency here, so that doesn't help. But secondly, it's like, well, that chart wasn't really designed for 7-yard two-handed semi-automatic shooting. That was more like 25-yard bullseye one-handed, back in the day. I mean, sure, there could be some things to it. And you could say that when you're trying to hit X rings at 50 yards, yeah, some of that little stuff, like very, very minute inputs into the gun from your grip of your hand, most of it's grip most of the time, right?
Yeah.
Some of it can be trigger, especially when, again, we're going high levels of precision. But when we're talking about, I need to drill a 5-inch or 6-inch target representative of the high center chest on a average size male at 3 to 10 yards, like, where you put your finger on the trigger, I'm sorry, it does not matter.
Right.
To get that job done.
Right. I have a friend in law enforcement, especially with newer instructors. It's a whirlwind of everything starts at the trigger and is wrong from there. And I'm like, nah, no. Yeah. As you mature, you'll start to see all these other things. And I'm having like this argument with a guy, and I'm like, look, I'm not trying to argue with him. I'm just saying, like, I can go out there with a timer and whack a piece of steel, an 8-inch plate at 50 yards in a quarter of a second every single time the timer goes off. It ain't the trigger. All right. Like, and so we have another mutual acquaintance he's a high level bullseye shooter. And I said, when you're shooting bullseye, I said, what do you focus on? He goes, my grip, my stance, my position. I said, where does trigger control fall into that? And he goes, you mean making the gun go off when I want it to? Whatever. And I look over and he's like, I'm like, I'm not a bullseye shooter, but that makes pretty. And he's like, yeah, there's like 8,000 things I think of before when the gun's going to go off. And, that's like, oh, hey, the sights are where they're at. Pow. It just happens, but, so it's funny how these things, they cycle and cycle and cycle and cycle. And, I think we as an industry have finally shook off the pin, the trigger thing. And we were fighting that up until like last year. Like everybody was. I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, and everything. DB and I did a podcast called "Everything Old is New Again," and he goes into the historical context of. He's like, oh yeah, these new B8 targets everybody's shooting on. I got a picture of Boots Askins in 1920, like 4, with the Border Patrol Colt target. And a B8 posted high center chest. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's so new. And so much of this stuff gets taken out of context and we lose sight of that. And I love Dave, talking to Dave and talking to DB, and you start hearing guys that are kind of in the top of like this generation that's kind of going into retirement, and they're just like, at wit's end with all of it. Like, hey, look, we're not doing anything. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Yeah. We're not the OSS in 1942 having to try to figure this stuff out. It's already been pretty well figured out. But everybody takes one little piece of it and spins it. That's like, yeah. So I didn't mean to do a shameless plug, but if you happen to be listening and subscribe to the Off Duty On Duty podcast, that's a great one. It's one of my favorites.
You're part of the family, bro. It's part of the network. Yeah. All good thoughts there, man. Let's kind of circle back to where we started and really what the topic of this episode is mainly about. I mean, this is all really good stuff to explore and could be additional fodder for future episodes as well. But sub-second draw. I'm going to kind of throw out, I'll just say this is the beginning of my final, I guess, word on the subject. But the final, kind of one of the final things I'm going to throw out there is that for me, well, first of all, I get satisfaction. I kind of touched on this a little bit. I get satisfaction from just pushing myself and seeing what I can do, right? So I'm always pushing that. I wanted to just mention and tie back to what I said earlier about maintaining skill. That for me to get to a sub-second draw, I would say that it had less to do with technique, because a lot of times people get hung up in technique and thinking there's just something else I got to fix to achieve this standard. But it had more to do with me believing that I could do it and actually letting go a little bit, meaning that stop, like caring less about where my hits were on target and just proving to myself I could actually move my body and my hands and my arms and the trigger finger and everything, and of course in the proper sequence and doing it safely, that I could do that in under a second. That was honestly probably the biggest thing for me in that battle, if you will, of just, hey, wow, I can actually draw my gun and fire a shot in 0.91. Okay, well now let's see if I can do that and see my sights and get a decent hit. That required a little bit more work, but a lot of the battle was just realizing and believing I could do it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Sometimes I think we get hung up on, it's so hard to reach some of these standards. And I think for some people it is, because I think we all have our own personal demons, if you will, and like mental blocks and maybe even physical blocks or handicaps too. But for most people I've worked with as shooters, it's not that hard to get them down to physically being able to move and draw a gun and shoot in a second or less. Beyond that, it becomes more about what can we visually see and process so that we can do that soon enough to actually get decent hits. That takes a little bit more work. But anyway, once we get to that level, so kind of with where I'm at right now, I do probably 30 to 50 practice draws every day, like religiously. And by the way, that's not a dedicated, like, well, it's my dry fire dojo time. It's 6:30 a.m. I'm going to, all right, got to go do the work, 10, 15, 20 minutes or whatever it is. It's more like, I've been sitting at the computer. And granted, I have the advantage of working from home. But, I've been sitting at the computer a while. All right, let's grab a practice gun. Let's grab a SIRT pistol, or I'll take my gun, unload it, put my ammo away, go somewhere safe. And I can just quickly do 10 reps, and move about my day, right? It's enough of a break from, doing emails or whatever, or planning for the Guardian conference. So my point is like, it doesn't have to be, it's not like if we're pursuing this high standard that we have to be doing a lot of or giving up a lot of time that could be employed elsewhere. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, I guess what I'm trying to say, at least to keep things sharp, especially once we get to that level. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of mention that, like, there's some discussion like, well, that's 10 extra minutes a day I could have been doing this or that with. We all have time we kind of like waste here and there. And when you become passionate enough about something like I have, it's like, I'll just take 1 minute right now and go do 10 draws and then move about my day. And 2 hours later, it's like, oh, and it just sort of happens. Like it's organic in my world. It's not something that's planned. It's not set on a timer. I'm like, do some draws. And then, and why I do a lot of draws, here's the truth about that, is because it's the one thing I can always practice all the time where I am. Like I can't practice some certain other things as readily or as easily. So it's like, do a draw, like whatever. So it's easy to do. I can fit it into my life in a simple, organic, non-disruptive manner. And it keeps things sharp. And it's that consistent amount of daily reps that keeps me where I am. Now, not everybody is able to do that. So that's where this podcast is for you to go, what can I do? What am I capable of? What time availability do I have? And how am I dividing up my resources and prioritizing them to achieve the goals I need to achieve? And all while not overlooking other important things. And that's one of the reasons why at the Guardian Conference, we don't just, yes, we have a lot of shooting classes. And we have a lot of shooting classes because that's what people want to do. That's the reality of it. But we also have low light classes, OC spray, legal classes, empty hand-to-hand combatives, blah, blah, blah. Okay. We'll have some seminars and lectures that will be more based on mindset and things like that. So please understand that, yeah, there would be a lot of shooting and we're gonna have a great time, but there's a lot of opportunities for people to zero in on maybe some other skills that maybe have been not focused on as much, or they haven't had the opportunities of attending high level training in those other disciplines. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that.
Cool, man.
So what's kind of your final words?
My final words, who are you? That would be the question I would pose. Reason being, and I know that sounds like that's like the number one question of life. Who am I? Figure out who you are in the defensive realm, right? I mean, self-evaluate. I would love to, maybe someday I'll come up with this chart that says, do you believe this? Yes. Okay. Go to block B, drop down. Okay. Are you this? Is this your daily life? I talked to some friends of mine in the industry that's exactly what they're doing right now, to try to get more engagement with people at the entry level of defensive handgunning mindset, all these things. So if you do a little introspective, like I'll give you mine. Okay. I'm a policeman. I have three other outside ventures away from police work, right? I got a podcast, I got a belt company, and I got a training company, right? So I have to balance all of that and maintain my skill set. So, do I benefit from going and taking a high level USPSA shooting class? Yeah, I mean, I'll benefit from it, but is that who I am right now? No. Now that may be I retire and I move into another phase of life and I go, I'm going to chase this but identify who you are and what your goals are and work from there. And if you work that backwards instead of, okay, well, I'm going to go take this, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go get an M4 carbine that looks just like the one and spray paint it and mount this optic on it. And I'm going to, get some night vision and all. I go, oh, okay, why? Who are you? Are you just curious and you want to explore that and it's fun and it's neat and it's exciting? Cool. Go do that. Yeah. But for me, I am a police officer, number one. So I need to be proficient with all those skill sets. After 20 years, yeah, I'm pretty proficient with most of them, right? And the number one skill set that has saved my bacon monumentally more times than anything else is between the two ears. Mm-hmm. And that takes a long time to develop, and to develop the ability to have conversational skills that will talk you out of getting into a confrontation, even though the desired outcome is not something the other participant wants.
Yeah.
So that's kind of who I am in a box, right? And I have to fit training and practice and all these other things in there and balance having some kind of life. I joked with my business partner, I had 3 days off this month. That's awesome. But if you don't determine who you are before you step into this venture, you spend a lot of time with boxes full of holsters, weekends full of training that are not applicable or not useful. Guns that set in a gun safe that are of no use. Flashlights that I tried that, it didn't work. You get the goodie box. Every guy that's been in this community for any length of time, if they haven't identified what's my mission, who am I, you get the goodie box and it gets full of stuff and thousands of dollars wasted. You know what I mean? So if you'll ask yourself, that's kind of my thing, is just like my new mission is like, ask yourself, who am I? Where do I fit into this? And that'll make things a lot easier, I think, on people.
Yeah. Really what you're suggesting is ask yourself the question, what is your mission?
Right.
Right. What drives you? What's most important to you in your life? Figure that crap out, and then prioritize your life around that. If it is becoming the fastest man alive, drawing and putting a round on target, great. Like knock yourself out. You'll have a lot of work ahead of you to get to that point. That's great. But I think part of what you're suggesting, Bryan, with who am I, identifying that and answering that question, is being honest in the answer. And by that, it's not, well, I'm really passionate about becoming, about being a better self-defense minded person, about being a better defensive fighter with a gun, whatever it is. But then all you do to support that is like you go and shoot IDPA matches and you've convinced yourself like that's my training to be the best, at the defensive fight as I can be. Well, that's not being honest with yourself. I think that's a lot. It's a subtle sort of hidden message, I think, in this episode today is like identifying your priorities and then actually doing the things that accomplish those priorities and being honest with yourself about that.
100%. Yeah.
Cool. I like where we've gone and where we've come to.
Yeah. So now I'm going to go practice my sub-second draw. So if you'll excuse me, I got to do about 50 reps. Just kidding.
I can tell you before the night is out, I probably will have done at least 30 more.
Perfect.
Because like I said, man, like evenings get a lot. Like it's like, all right, just got the kids tucked to bed. I'm, a little bit overwhelmed with the busyness and craziness of getting all the kids in bed and everything, getting them ready for school the next day, and need a chance to check out for a minute. All right, step aside to my dry fire dojo, do 5 minutes. All right, cool. Go back to the living room, hang out with the missus. An hour or two later, hey, step aside. I'm constantly practicing, dude. So, but I'm fortunate to be able to do that. Not everyone is, and I understand that. And you, good luck catching me, bro.
Well, hey, I'll be honest with you. I draw at least twice a day.
That's good.
Before I walk out the door, and I'm usually in and out 2 or 3 times. Before I do it, just make sure my clothes and everything are working.
Yeah, I think that's so wise of you as a law enforcement officer. And I wish more officers actually did something similar as far as like, hey, if you got to use that gun on duty today to save your life or someone else, I hope it's not the first time you're drawing that day.
Yeah, I go back to work bright and early tomorrow, and I put my duty rig on. And before I walk out the door, it's 5, 10 draws, double check everything, make sure.
Awesome.
Get all that stuff in order.
It's a great opportunity to do an equipment check, right? Like making sure you're actually loaded up and that stuff is in proper order, because if you're going to do those dry reps, okay, check the gun, unload, everything looks good, inspect my ammo looks good, set everything aside, check gun, cycle's good, trigger's working, if you have a safety's working, blah, blah, blah. Holster, some dry fire draws. All right, looks good. I feel good. Load back up, back in holster, out the door you go. Like that, when I was doing law enforcement work, I did that every time before I went on shift. It was that it was an equipment check, ammo check, skills check, load up, and away we go.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear you do that, brother.
The neighbors hate the pepper spray check. No, I'm totally kidding, by the way. Yeah, totally kidding. But I have had that happen. I went to deploy it one time and it went, and I went, oh man. So yeah. Well,
all right, man.
I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Bryan. Appreciate you doing this episode with me, guys. One more time, where you can find Bryan is the Off Duty On Duty podcast. What's the website domain? I always forget.
It's offdutyonduty.com.
Offdutyonduty.com. See, I can't remember if it's offdutyondutypodcast.com or mine is a podcast.
Yeah.
So guys, go check out Off Duty On Duty podcast. Check out EDC Belt Company. EDCBeltCo.com is a website, right?
Yeah.
And again, you can find the product at concealedcarry.com/foundation belt. I think I said foundation earlier. I think it works, but foundation belt I know for sure works. And then the 2021 Guardian Conference, guardianconference.com. So, guys, that's a wrap. A little bit longer episode, but I appreciate the conversation, Bryan. It's been a great time.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So with that, we'll sign on out of here. A reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.